So, welcome to my explanation of how to use the new macro sheet for the Witcher tabletop role-playing game. So the goal of this sheet is to save a lot of stat blocks for you, those of enemies and those of players, and to allow you to automate a lot of the interactions of those stat blocks. To start off with, I'm just going to go through the sheets that are available here. We have an active combat sheet, that is where we'll have the stat blocks of the enemies and also the player characters in initiative order when we actually run a combat. We have a stat entry sheet with a lot of buttons that allow us to set up NPCs and add them to this list and monsters. And then we have a Bestiary which collects our stat blocks that we've already written so that we can, if we, for example, have entered a basic generic ghoul into this thing, we can really quickly get that ghoul back up and running for encounters. So that's the basic idea of this sheet. So in order to use this sheet, we're going to have to enter some stats into it, so NPC stats. So to do that, I will go to the stat entry sheet, which is where I am right now, and I will click Add New NPC, and this will set up a blank stat block for me. So what you want to do here is you want to basically fill in this blank stat block. So give it a name. Let's call it the Mutated Ogre, say. Yeah, we can spell better than that. And what we can do is then we just fill in the stats. Now, as you can see here, as I fill in these main stats, I'm going to get changes in the entire sheet. We can ignore the blue and the yellow and the red cells for now. Those are important later. But what we can see is that basically the run speed, jump speed is calculated for us. We can see that all of the skills that are based on a given stat, say dodge is based on reflex, are initially set to that stats value. We can edit these as we choose. So maybe we want some better stats here. And that way, we basically build our stat sheet quite fast and easily. Now, I'm not going to fill in all of this because not all of this is important. One other thing that's calculated automatically is the brawl damage. This is calculated directly from the body score for just normal punches. Hit points are calculated automatically, stamina is calculated automatically, and so is resolve. What we need to still enter is the different attacks this person has and the different armor they may have at certain points. So if I want to enter attack, I might, for example, give my ogre a giant club. I'll just call it that. And now I can enter the attack bonus with giant club here. Right? And now I need to enter the damage the giant club does here. Let's go 66 plus 10. And we'll give it some reliability as well. Now I can do this for any number of attacks. So I can give this ogre a thrown rock. Let's say at, 18. We'll give the thrown rock 5d6 damage, and we don't care about reliability here. And basically I can enter as many attacks up to the 4 as I want, and if I don't want to give my character all 4 attacks, I just delete these names. I can also enter some custom skills in here if I want to. So if my ogres for some reason have a hex weaving skill, then I could enter that here and I could give it a sort of bonus. Of course, this doesn't make much sense for this NPC, but if you want to be able to roll tests on that during a combat, this is where you would enter it. There's 2 spaces. Finally, we can add some armor. So, let's give these guys a little bit of armor on various spots. Maybe have them a little weak on the head, and we'll give them otherwise fairly uniform armor. Right, you can also fill in a luck and a vigor stat here. These do nothing at this point, but, they're there so you can keep track of them. So this is how you would basically fill in stats. When you're done filling in the stats here, what you do next is you go to add resistances, immunities, etc. So at this point, we can now go through an entire list of conditions as well as damage types, and we can say, let's add some resistance to our ogres. Maybe they've got spongy skin that makes them quite resistant to bludgeoning damage, and let's also add immunity to elemental damage, and maybe we'll make them vulnerable to piercing damage. So in this way we can add vulnerabilities and so on and so forth. We can also add a typical monster resistance stat. So in The Witcher, you might know, there are some monsters that are resistant to weapons that aren't silver. So we have monster resistance vulnerable to silver. And in the optional rules, you can also add vulnerability to meteorite weapons to some monsters. So we can choose basically here, is this going to take full damage from everything? Or we might want to make this particular monster vulnerable to meteorites. Now, the hit points, as I mentioned earlier, are calculated directly from the will and the body scores, but some monsters in the rulebook actually have extra hit points. Those monsters will always have double the amount of hit points they would normally have. If we want this to have this monster to also have double the amount of hit points, we can set a tick here, we won't see a change here. But the monster will be calculated as having twice the amount of hit points when you import it into a sheet. We have here an option for body part multipliers. If we wanted to make, for example, this monster take specifically extra damage from the head, let's say there's a particular weak point of the mutation there, we could put the multiplier to damage for head damage at 4. These are ways we can sort of customize our monsters, otherwise it will be set to the default stats from the rulebook. Right, we can also select whether this NPC has an anatomy. Some NPCs like elementals, golems and so on might not have anatomies and thereby be immune to certain crits. We can set that flag here and the sheet will automatically, if that crit is rolled for this monster, then not apply the crit and do the extra damage instead. We can say that this needs to use the monster hit table, that is, this will be treated as a monster with wings, tail and so on and so forth in the hit tables, if we want to, or if it's not, if it's a humanoid, we just leave this unchecked. We can add an innate focus value. Right now the spells are not implemented in the sheet, so right now this does nothing, but for future use this should also reduce spellcasting costs. And then we can also customize all of the attacks we just entered. So right now we have the giant club active. As you can see, we can select any of the attacks that the ogre has. If we add the giant club, right, so we can change what type it is. This is a melee attack, so we're going to leave it at that. We can change whether it does extra damage to armor when it penetrates. We can change whether it does damage to armor regardless of whether it penetrates the armor or not. So if you've got a weapon that's particularly good at breaking down armor, you could sort of enter damage here. You can make this weapon stunning on hit. This is the stunning rule from the rulebook. So if it hits, let's say, the body and or the torso, that is, or the head, then an opponent will be forced to make a stun save. We can take what damage types it has. Club is unlikely to do these damage types, but we can make it bludgeoning. Melee weapons will automatically detect it as slashing and piercing. We can add a weapon accuracy mod to the weapon. We can add a block bonus to the weapon if we want. Block bonus is an optional rule that I use at my table, where weapons can give bonuses to defensive actions like parrying and block. That you can add here if you want, for example, for a shield. You can make this weapon non-lethal. You can give it the armor-piercing quality from the rulebook or the improved armor-piercing quality from the rulebook. Have it count as meteoric for the purposes of breaking resistance, count as silver, and or do bonus silver damage. Give it the balanced property from the rulebook that increases the improves the unaimed crits you can do. And if we advance the attack options, we can also see some more additional options. So, for example, we can make this attack cost stamina, like the Witcher's Whirl, or we can say that it's reduced by focus. Recall, focus is not yet implemented, so please don't use this yet. Focus value for the weapon specifically, so that if you're disarmed of this weapon, you no longer have access to that. Again, focus and spellcasting is not yet implemented. We can add a rate of fire, so we can allow the NPC to attack multiple times when they're using this attack. And we can make this weapon also do additional damage to weapons that are used to block it if we want. So let's say this is a weapon that actually does 1d3 damage to weapons that are used to block it. We can have the weapon or this attack apply conditions when it hits. So, for example, we might sort of, make people, I don't know, what can we do here? Let's say we might knock them prone if we actually succeed in penetrating their armor at a low percentage chance, let's say 10%. And we might also stagger them regardless of whether we penetrate their armor on a hit, right? So we can sort of apply up to 3 conditions with different percentage chances, and we can decide whether the conditions are always applied or whether they're only applied if the attack actually deals damage. So, for example, bleeding, you often only want to apply if the attack actually deals damage. Down here we have the option to disable the attack. This is typically not used to start with, but if I were to enter something here, then the attack would count as disabled, and it would show the reason that I enter here due to as to why it was disabled, and I could remove this. This is more for the internal work of the sheet. For example, if a weapon breaks, there will be a message added here. Then we have the allowed defenses against this attack. So this is a melee attack, and the sheet has basically guessed that all of the basic melee defenses will work against it, but some of the monsters in the rulebook will not allow you to parry attacks, for example, so particularly large monsters will not allow you to parry them. So you could remove that option here, or add it in again if you want. And of course for ranged weapons, you're not allowed to block with a weapon, and so on and so forth. All of this stuff can be set up here. We can also state that this attack counts as a shield. This is important if the NPC is defending with this attack. Against a ranged attack, for example, if it doesn't count as a shield, it won't be allowed to do so. And we can also say that, the NPC should not move for this. The sheet can't actually tell whether an NPC has moved, but it can tell if an NPC is affected by a condition that might not allow it to move. And if that was the case, then ticking this option would basically mean that the sheet would ask you, can you really attack with this attack right now if your NPC is currently locked down by some kind of condition? So we can set all of this stuff with as much accuracy and fidelity as we want to. And we can do this for each individual attack. Now you see I've got a thrown rock. The sheet read the word thrown here, identified it as a thrown weapon, and therefore goes with the most common thrown weapons, which are throwing knives and so on. They do slashing. We're going to go for bludgeoning here as well. And we're going to take a look and see the advanced attack options, and you will see, because this has been identified as a thrown attack, all of the defenses are pretty much allowed, but weapon block has been removed. Parry is now at -5. Parry arrows is allowed. So all of this is as per the rulebook. In case you're wondering about superior parry, that is a house rule I use. It is a special Witcher skill that is available in Reddit if you want to see it, but it is allowed here. And as thrown attack, generally these ranges are calculated from your body stat, so they can throw it up to, let's say, 3 times their body stat, then I would enter that much here, as it says. So all of this stuff can be set up and done. It really is worth doing this when you enter NPCs into the sheet, because it'll save you a lot of time down the line if you enter the stats properly, because that way they'll be calculated properly. Note that I don't have to add damage here because I added damage in the sheet, as you might recall. Okay, so I'm going to click done here. And now I basically got my NPC ready. I could add conditions to this NPC so that they start with specific conditions, for example, starting, regenerating, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to do that now. We're going to cover that later when we cover conditions. For now, let's call this stat block done. I can add any notes by hand if I want to add them. So let's say I can put some notes here, or I can also put some notes here. You will see that this seems very small, but these spaces are actually enlarged when it's in the active combat, so you should be able to see all of your notes. Right, so at that point I'm pretty much done, and I can now export this NPC to the Bestiary. And if I do that, I can clear the stat entry sheet. I'm going to go ahead and do that and delete everything on this sheet because it's now already in the Bestiary. So all of the stats I just added have been transferred here. And if I got anything wrong, I can still edit resistances, immunities, and so on and so forth while I'm here. So no worries there. Okay, so this is how I would enter stats into the Bestiary for NPCs. Now, I might want to add player character stats to this sheet as well, so that I can sort of automatically have attacks resolve and so on and so forth. Now, I don't do that using these full stat blocks. Instead, I use this button on the main active combat sheet called Add PCs, Configure PC Profiles. So let's just add a PC right now. We can create Geralt of Rivia as a new PC. And we can basically set up Geralt's stats here. So we have a defensive profile, whether Geralt has any kind of resistance, whether Geralt has anatomy, whether Geralt should be using the monster hit zone table, maybe some resistances from armor, for example, things like that. And we can also set up attacks for Geralt. So let's go with the Witcher sword for Geralt as a melee weapon. We'll give it a 46 plus 4 damage. And we have to enter damage here because the player character sheets are not really saved in their entirety on this sheet. It's just the attacks and the defense profile, because that's all the NPCs will generally be interacting with. Because players tend to roll their own dice. So we can make this armor piercing as well as the way that the Witcher swords tend to be, and at that point we've basically statted up a Witcher sword. We do have the same options as we would otherwise have, so I can just, if I want to adjust this even more, I can do so. But for now I'm just going to save this and close and save. And now Geralt of Rivia is set up as a PC in this sheet, and whenever I reset the sheet now, I will actually see Geralt of Rivia appearing as a potential character for the game. So that's how you set up player characters. So one thing to note is if I need to edit my PCs, I can always open up this thing again and I can add more attacks, delete PCs. If I want to add an additional attack, I just enter a new name. So let's give Geralt a silver sword, right? And I could give him like 1d6 plus 4 damage, make it a silver weapon with a 3d6 additional silver damage. And, it's quite simple to add these extra attacks. And it's also quite simple to add an extra PC. So let's just add Yennefer, create her as a new PC. And let's just give her a fireball attack, right? make it an elemental attack, and we'll make it a thrown ranged weapon, and we'll give it a damage of 2d6. And because we're having fun, why don't we just add, we don't want range calculated here, we'll have a maximum range of 12 meters. We don't allow parrying, we do allow all of this other stuff, and maybe we can have this apply fire at 50% when it hits, right? Regardless of whether it does damage or not. So it's fairly quick to set up all of these things. Right now we've got some resistances on Yennefer, let's take those out, and we can save the attack profile and save the defense profile. So that's how you would set up player characters, and as soon as you have multiple player characters, you can see that the multiple player characters also appear and are ready to be used. Now I might want to prepare encounters for my group, or I might want to have them on the fly. So for example, I can add NPCs from my bestiary on the fly using this button here on the active combat sheet, and I can choose any NPC in my bestiary. Right now I've only got the mutated ogre. I can choose how many I want to import. Let's say I want to import 4 as a nice tough encounter. And I can either import them as is, or if I want, I can also randomize some of their stats so that there's a little more variation if I'm importing multiple variants of these. In order to do that, I can just click any of these, and I can basically say I want the minimum modifier to be like -2, the maximum to be +2. That would mean that each ogre would have a stat of intelligence stat of either from 2 less to its normal stat up to 2 more than its normal stat. And if I want to have a quick view as to see which ogres are particularly clever, I might also add descriptors from randomization. And I'd say any ogre that is modified by 2 or more, so maximum modifier here, gets a descriptor added to the stat block so that it's easy for me as a GM to quickly come up with descriptions on the fly if an ogre, for example, looks particularly dumb. So if I click import now, I will get some randomized ogres. I also have some presets here for particular variants of types of monsters. So runts, for example, will generally reduce most of the stats, whereas varied will sort of just give you general variation, and elite will generally increase most of the stats. Now you can see randomized intelligence remains active. Right, and if I just import let's say 4 varied ogres, then what I'll get is the stat blocks of 4 varied ogres. They'll be numbered, right? And what you can see here is the notes have been modified. So this ogre has increased reflexes, is increased body. So this ogre rolled really well on the randomization, most of it. And sort of we have a little bit of descriptive notes down here that tells you what kind of randomization was going on. So that's how you would import an encounter just from the bestiary. If you wanted to have a random encounter, you could really quickly get a group of monsters up. So if I want to set up a full encounter beforehand, like for example mixing different monsters, I know I'm going to have a certain specific type of encounter in my adventure and I don't want to have to spend time importing all the individual monsters from the bestiary, I can also set up an encounter in the stat entry sheet ahead of time. So for example, just now I'm going to make it easy on myself. I'm just going to import a couple of mutated ogres. You might be wondering where the knights came from. I've been doing some video editing magic, so I've had some extra stat blocks included since in between. And I've got now my 3 sort of ogres in here, right? And I'm going to add some extra knights because I have that stat block set up. Let's say 5 knights, and we'll make them elites and import them. Right, and at this point we now have a mixed encounter. We could add any number of NPCs, and we don't have to add them just from the bestiary. We can always add new NPCs and just fill them in by hand. But once we feel this encounter is prepared, we can click Export Encounter to Worksheet, and I can sort of, in that way, prepare my encounter beforehand. And once I've set that up, you can see the sheet exists with all of the monsters. Some of the invisible cells are now visible. Don't worry too much about that. That's what the sheet needs to save all of the stuff you enter. But when I want to enter the encounter, I can then load a prepared encounter from an encounter sheet, and I can just add that to an existing encounter or as a start as a new, and you will see that the stat blocks have now been imported. So that's how you can prepare an encounter beforehand. So once I've got an encounter all set up, I've got my player characters entered, I've got my stat blocks in the main active combat sheet, all that is great. Now I want to start my combat. So the first thing I have to do before I can start my combat is roll initiative. So I'll click this roll initiative button first. And the sheet will ask me for each player character what is the initiative that their player rolled, because typically your player characters will be rolling their initiative themselves instead of having you do it. So let's just enter a 19 for Geralt, and Yennefer is clever but maybe not quite as fast. Let's give her a 16. And then the sheet will ask, do you want to start a new round? Or, generally you'll want to start a new round, unless you want to have some special actions beforehand. And once you click yes, you will see that the entirety of the NPCs have automatically rolled their initiative, and it's all been ordered. And furthermore, this list has been ordered, and this list is now in the same order as this list. So you're always going to have the NPC whose turn it is next at the top of your stat block, and that's going to keep changing as we go down the initiative list. So this is how you would start a new round. Now, if you want something to actually start, the new round is basically always there. It's going to be declared at the beginning of every round so that you're reminded if you've got anything you need to do every round at the start of the turn. Now, that's basically you're going to want to have your characters act. So let's start with having an NPC attack a player character. So when I click Next Combatant, it switches to Mutated Ogre 3's turn, it highlights them, and I can now click the Attack with Defend Against Current Character button to attack using my giant club. So this opens up this dialog, which allows me to choose whichever attack I'm going to use. And depending on what attack I use, I'm going to get different information in the middle. So for ranged attacks, I will get the ranged modifiers. I will get the options the defender has based upon what kind of attack this is. And I'll get an average damage. This is calculated on the fly, so it may change slightly depending, whenever you change your attack. But it's going to be fairly accurate. We can also select whether we want to target a specific individual. So the sheet will assume that NPCs want to target player characters. So I could choose Geralt, for example. And this would then change the possible targeting zones because Geralt's not a monster. Or I could switch to targeting an NPC on the sheet. So for now, let's have a player character attack. Let's say we throw a rock at Yennefer. So this is the kind of stuff that's going on right now. I can select a body part to aim at, and the attack bonus will be automatically modified. I can also select this to be a strong strike, in which case damage would be doubled, and we'll get a -3 modifier. You can see this modifier has been included up here automatically, and we'll see the ×2 damage is included in the summary. Or just take that out, and this will revert the changes. By the way, if you've already put in some kind of situational modifier, you enter strong strike charge, that will actually change in line with what you already put in. So, don't worry too much about losing any inputs here. We can allow the ogre to roll exploding tests. That is, if they roll a 10, then they will roll again and continue rolling until they stop rolling 10s, same as player characters would, which can lead to very high results. This also means that they can fumble. So if they roll a 1, then they will actually subtract from their general test score. So basically, if you want to have it less predictable, more bursty, you put the tick here, maybe for particularly important NPCs or strong ones. And for maybe your fodder, maybe you don't want to have that happen. That's basically up to you. You can select whether your NPCs explode or not. We have an option here to skip the hit consequences form. I'm going to just say leave the check mark out of that for now, because this form will show you all of the hit consequences in detail, allow you to adjust them. You can put a tick here if you want to just get a brief summary message of what the attack will do. And then you can still get into the detail form if you want, but for now we're going to leave this tick off. On the right here we have all of the possible buttons we can click. We have the option to change our attack properties for our thrown rock if we haven't done so up to now. But of course we did enter the right properties for this attack, so we're leaving that as it is. We have special options, so we can recover stamina this round. That would mean we skip our turn and we just automatically recover stamina. Not going to do that right now. And we have all of the special attack options that are in the rulebook. Things like pommel striking, push kicking, disarming, grappling, and so on and so forth. If we click on any of these, it'll automatically select the appropriate attack. So for a grapple, it'll automatically select a brawl, if that applies. And then roll the test and sort of set up the results. If we roll a disarm or a pommel strike, it will keep the attack we currently have, but apply the modifiers as per rulebook. For now, we're going to stick with just a really simple attack. So if I click attack, I get a summary of what happened. So we were aiming at the torso, which is why we attacked with an aimed strike to the torso. And the result is going to be a 22. Now the sheet is going to ask, Yennefer, what's your defense? So you can at this point ask your player character, how are you going to do this? The player has an option as how they want to respond. They generally are told the result before they have to choose their option. So Yennefer is going to choose her defense option and is going to roll and is going to tell you her result typically. So we could just enter Yennefer's result here. Don't mind this stagger attacker box. This is just there in case you're parrying in melee combat. This should automatically be checked. And if you beat the attacker's result, then that will stagger the attacker. But for now, none of that is relevant because this is a thrown attack. So let's say Yennefer actually does get hit. And you know what? Let's say she gets hit by a margin of 9 points. So that actually is a critical hit. So if I click OK now, the hit consequences form will open up. So we see on the left basically the majority of the attacker's options, things like who's attacking, what's the attack, what was the target zone, what kind of attack was it. All of this is included and basically taken from the forms before. And the damage type, and all of this is also taken from what we entered into this attack initially. Because we beat Yennefer's defense by 9 points, the sheet automatically will set this as a simple crit. And because it was a torso-affected attack, this is also already set. So at this point, we can basically see these are the results. This is something we can read out to our players, and the players will then be able to respond appropriately. So the sheet doesn't know what kind of armor players has. It tells you we have 14 damage before armor. It will deal damage to armor if it penetrates. And, this does 1 times damage after penetration. Yeah. And if you want to be a little bit sneaky as a dungeon master, you can, of course, reroll the results. If the damage is too high, for example, or something, if you want to change things going on, you can see the damage is changing here, and the crit is also occasionally changing, very occasionally changing. There we are. We can, if we want to fudge the things a bit, reduce the crit severity or increase the crit severity. Yeah. So all of these options are available. We could also change the damage options and reroll things basically, and for that we can also use all of these special attacks. If we want to quickly change the attack because we misclicked earlier on, then we can do that using these buttons. Right, and as you can see here, Yennefer's defensive profile is pretty much empty. If we had targeted Geralt, then we would automatically have Geralt's defensive profile, and we would see that this now affects Geralt. Unfortunately, his resistances don't protect him. But what we can do is, just for the sake of demonstration, if we actually put bludgeoning down as a defense for Yennefer, we will see that Yennefer is resistant to the attack. The sheet will remind us that this is a bludgeoning attack and that she is resistant to it. So that's the reason why we have this stuff up here, so that we have full information to give to our players. And that is how you would resolve an attack with the player. One thing that's going to happen after most attacks is that the sheet is going to know you've just attacked. Probably your NPC is done. Is it the next character's turn? If we had used an attack with a rate of fire of 2, the sheet would instead have asked us, do you want to take your second attack right now? So if rate of fire is above 1, the sheet will actually ask, do you want to take your iterative attacks until you either reach the rate of fire, or you say, no, everyone's dead, or everyone's moved out of range, not going to take any more attacks. And at that point, the sheet will then say, do you want to move on to the next actor like it is doing right now? So if I click yes, it'll switch to Geralt. If I click no for some reason, because I want to change something or do something more, I can then move to Geralt as the next actor when I click this next combatant button. And I'm going to do that right now. So now that it's Geralt's turn, Geralt maybe wants to attack one of our NPCs. So the player is probably going to choose their own attack and do all of that stuff themselves. We have to defend. We can click either this button or this button, basically the same. We're going to defend with an NPC, and we can basically set up. The difference between these buttons is this is a generic defense, and if I click the attack defend against current character, the sheet will be red. It's Geralt's turn right now, and basically we'll be seeing Geralt's attack set up here automatically. So let's say Geralt goes up against one of our ogres with a silver sword. So what we see right now is, what are the options the NPC has? Only those options will actually be active here. You can see parry, arrow, spear, parry are actually not active. What are the options we have, and what kind of consequences do these options include? Is a brief summary on this side. We could just click one of these buttons to resolve the defense. We could switch the attack with which we are, for example, blocking. So we would change our bonus potentially, or it might not change our bonus in this particular ogre's case. But, change which damage is going to be, change which weapon is going to be damaged, all of this stuff. We could also choose a custom defense skill if we were doing something particularly exotic. We're not going to look at that right now. If we were grappled, we could also click this button to just briefly try to escape. We can add modifiers if we want. And if the ogre has already been attacked this turn, We can put a tick here if we want, and then this will cost stamina for the ogre to dodge. And if the ogre has no stamina left, we'll get a warning and they won't be able to defend anymore. We can check whether the test should be exploding. I'm going to put this up here. And again, we have the option to expedite things a bit. We're going to leave that out for now. So let's going to just try and block Geralt's attack with the silver sword. So Geralt's result can be entered here, right? And we'll have an automatic roll on mutated ogre's result. Let's assume the mutated ogre actually manages to block this attack to start with. We'll get a message saying the ogre succeeded at a block. This has dealt reliability damage to the weapon if applicable. And then, because Geralt is a player character, the sheet will ask, is there going to be a second attack? Because often player characters will attack twice because of the fast attack option. So let's just go yes. And it's going to take the same options as before. And as you can see, the ogre is now noted as already having dodged this turn and will therefore take stamina loss if they try to dodge again. Now let's try to parry this for now. If we parry Geralt's result effectively, we'll get a message that Geralt has been staggered. So basically the sheet will try to remind you what you need to tell your characters. Now I'm just going to illegally have Geralt attack again. And what we're going to do now is we're going to choose Mutated Ogre 2 again. And we're going to now miss our defense. So let's say Geralt actually succeeds in hitting us. Probably would, he's fairly epic. Let's give him a 30 on his attack. Now at this point, because Geralt is a player character, you can enter whether the attack was aimed. This is basically meant to remind you, was the player aiming, and if so, to enter the correct zone. Let's say Geralt was aiming at torso. And what we see is we see the same consequences form as we would for attacking a player, except now Geralt is the attacker. We can see all that we entered for Geralt's stuff is still there, is still here. The crit has been registered, and the target is here on the sheet. And if we click roll results, we can see what happens. Now, of course, often players are going to want to roll their own damage. So what you want to do here is you want to enter their damage into this box. Let's say, for example, they roll the entirety of their damage, 46. Let's call that 17 damage, right? And we want to enter a 0 here, and the sheet will read as 17 damage, and it will do the 17 damage, right? So what we see here is basically the results of Geralt's attack, and all of this is going to be automatically applied to the ogre if we want it to be applied to the ogre, right? We can see that there's an option here that the ogre may be vulnerable to the attack depending on what damage type is being used. So this is the kind of thing the sheet will ask us. But basically we can click finished here if we're okay with this, or we can fudge the results if we're not okay with this. And once we click finished, this is going to be applied, and the sheet will ask us any questions that are open. So for example, we know that the ogre, as we can see, the defensive, is actually vulnerable to piercing damage. We know that Geralt could be doing slashing or piercing damage. So the sheet doesn't know what's going on and will ask us, was Geralt doing piercing damage? Basically. Let's say no. Right? And what we see is we actually got hit by a critical hit here, as you can see. And as is mentioned, this forces a stun save, and the sheet is going to automatically do the stun save for us. And we see that the ogre actually fails their stun save. And at this point, we can have Geralt perform a second attack straight away against this ogre. And you will see that the ogre actually has no defense this time. They are unable to defend themselves due to conditions. The final defense result will be 10, and all we can do is click to resolve this. Right? So if we do this, we'll basically get a little bit of a warning that they can't defend, and that the stunned condition will be removed automatically once they're hit. And we can have Geralt do, a huge, terrible attack. Let's go for an unnamed attack this time. And once again, we'll see the damage is entered here. We can give him 17 damage, and we roll those results. And you can see that now we have a really bad crit to the heart, hemorrhaging damage. And when we click finished, this is all going to be applied. And this time Geralt knows to actually attack with a piercing attack, so we'll take double damage. And the monster is shaken out of stun. And what we see here is the critical hit is actually affecting the monster in a really bad way. So we're getting some messages saying, oh, your body has been reduced. That means your hit points are reduced as well. And this gives you the option as to whether you want to reduce the current hit points as well. So we'll click cancel for now to keep the reduction only to the max. And once again, unfortunately, the new critical hit stuns the ogre again. And the ogre is in a bad way. So when Geralt is done, we can move to the next actor's turn. So that's how you resolve a defense for one of your NPCs. Now the sheet also allows you to have stat blocks interact with each other, so NPCs interact with each other. So let's say these knights are trying to help out Geralt and Yennefer against the mutated ogres. So I could have knight number 5 attack an NPC on the sheet by ticking this, and then basically just choosing, let's go for that ogre who's like in a bad way beforehand. And let's take our big, bad Berserker axe, right? We know mutated ogre is not doing well, and we're going to aim for the head as well. And we're going to do a strong strike, because why the hell not? Right? So this is like a finishing move on this ogre, and we can just sort of, set this up, choose the target, and if we click attack, the knight is going to roll a check, and now this is going to open the defense form for the mutated ogre. Now, of course, the ogre was stunned, so we don't get an option to do anything. And this is just going to hit them. And what we see here is that this is just absolutely going to slaughter the mutated ogre. They're shaken out of conditions. And because we can see the ogre is completely, almost completely dead, should we just skip the crit? We can skip it and remove the ogre. And that ogre has now been killed, has been removed from the list. Right? So that would be a simple way of setting up NPC attacks. I'm going to skip Yennefer now, and I'm going to have Knight 1 attack one of the other mutated ogres. So you can kind of see the entire set, because the other ones have not been touched yet, and they're not stunned. They should be able to defend. So I'm going to have them strong strike this ogre and attack. And now we see the full defense form opening, because this ogre is actually allowed to defend. And we have the typical choice as before. The ogre is probably going to feel fairly comfortable parrying and is actually going to succeed. Knight 1 gets staggered. And that's how this would run. So that's how you can have your NPCs interact with one another. One thing I'd also like to briefly show you is how these special attack buttons work. So if we have an attacker who's using, let's say, set up to use a longsword by default, right? And we click one of these buttons down here, then that will actually automatically attempt to attack with Brawl. And we'll set up, let's just have this mutated ogre just mess up their defense. We'll set up an attack that actually does no damage and simply applies the grappled condition. So clicking these buttons is a quick way to kind of apply a condition on a hit. So it's a simple way to just do that. If we had a different kind of attack going on here, let's say we had a Berserker axe and we tried to use a pommel strike, then we'd also get the similar result. We're going to have the ogre get hit by this, and you can sort of see that we've got a half damage here that's automatically applied, and it's also set up as a non-lethal attack, right? And that's just a pommel strike being set up here. So this is basically a quick way of applying these special attack options. Right, now as we continue, I'm just going to go skip through here. As we continue, we reach a character who's actually been affected by a condition. So you recall we just tried to grapple this ogre and we did succeed. So now we get a little bit of a condition summary when the ogre has their turn start, so that you don't completely miss that they're being grappled. So this gives you a little bit of an idea what the condition does and gives you a reminder that you shouldn't move this character away from whoever's grappling them right now. Right? And there's a big special warning if there's these preventions of actions that comes there as well. For now, I'm just going to skip past this, and I want to show you what happens if you want to do something like an Aard. So let's go to Geralt's turn. Let's say Geralt is in position to use Aard on both of the mutated ogres. Now how would you handle this? Aard requires Geralt to roll a test on spellcasting. We'll let the player character do that, and that gives us a DC which we have to then dodge and avoid in order not to get knocked down or staggered. So what I do is I will go to roll test with NPCs, and I will mark everyone who is being affected. So let's go for the mutated ogres right now, and we'll have them together roll dodge checks. And the DC, let's say Geralt rolled 19. on his spellcasting roll, we can have them do this. And now what we can do is we can have consequences apply depending on whether they pass or fail the test. So a typical Aard spell by a Witcher, the sign, will actually apply the condition staggered at 100% if it succeeds. And let's say Geralt put in some stamina into this, so it actually has, let's say, a decent chance of also knocking them prone. If I now click roll test, what you'll see is that both of these ogres will roll. And as you can see, they both succeed at this particular test. Now I'm going to just, for the sake of argument, I'm going to make this a lot more difficult for them. And I'm going to have them both roll on, I can also enter this here, on dodge, and do exactly the same as I had before. I'm going to stagger them, and then I'm going to put them prone at 40%. And I'm just going to have them roll this. And as you can see, one of the ogres is actually already staggered. So the sheet will ask me to remove that condition. For now, I'm just going to go, no, doesn't help. Because what happened here is that they actually failed their skill checks, and this is why the sheet just asked me whether to remove the staggered effect. They failed their skill checks, and it turns out that both of them rolled badly on prone, so both of them have now been affected. The sheet now knows this and has saved this as an effect. So when I go to the next ogre, excuse me, oh, see, Knight 1 was also staggered, but when I go to the next ogre's turn, you will see that the ogre is now grappled, staggered, and prone. Right? So all of this stuff is being saved by the sheet. And we get the warning that they can't move. Okay. You can also see that the actual bonuses in the blue cells are now lower. So the blue cells are all about the modifiers that are currently applied. So this is what the sheet currently thinks the bonus is for this character. So this includes all of the conditions that they're sort of suffering from. The yellow cells you can use to enter sort of persistent modifiers. So if you, for example, have the situation where this ogre has also now entered an Aard, you might want to reduce their speed by 2, their giant club by 2, their thrown rock by 2, their brawl by 2, and all of these skills that would be affected by, athletics isn't, that would be affected by an Aard can be reduced here, and this will now be used in the modifier. So this will actually have an effective modifier of 13. Right? So you can use these fields to enter stuff. You might also notice that this red field has a 3 in it. This is because this mutated ogre has already taken 3 points of stamina damage from having to dodge multiple times during the same turn. You can leave it as like this if you want. Basically, this means in the red field, the number is how much damage has been taken. You can put negative numbers if you want to heal them. You can leave it as it is, or if you want to have a little bit of an idea where they currently stand, you can click Update Hit Point Stamina SP, and you can see that this has changed the actual amount of damage here. And what you might not be able to tell right now, what I'm just going to show you, is if you update this sufficiently, then this cell also will change color, so you have a bit of a better idea of what's going on. And whenever you update, you also get a bit of a summary if anyone's dead or dying or any such things. So you can roll tests using the sheet, have consequences applied to those tests. You might have noticed you can also have damage applied to various body parts and so on and so forth if you want. Or you could even use a custom skill bonus if you just want to have them roll something special, So you can do all of this stuff. You can also roll stun saves. That will automatically select the correct sort of consequences. So the sheet is set up to help you roll the most common types of tests as easily as possible. So there's only a few things left to look at now. One is what happens with the conditions, and the other is these special options we have here. We're going to look at the special options first. So we can click on action out of sequence if we want to switch the turn. So if you click next combatant too early, you can just click quick switch back to last actor, and that will go back to your last actor. If, on the other hand, you want to sort of go to a specific actor's turn, you can just select them here in the menu, and then you can either have them switch to and made it their turn, so if you just want to change the initiative order or something, right? You can just click that. And of course, if the actor is on the NPC sheet, that is, you've got an ogre or something, you can have them skip applying conditions at the beginning of their turn. So some conditions will do damage over time, for example. You can skip that application if you want by putting a check mark here. Alternatively, you can switch to a character whose turn it isn't as an out-of-turn action. You might recall there's extra actions you can take for 3 stamina, which are, in theory, potentially allowed to be taken at any time during the round. So you can have one of those out-of-turn actions. So if we switch to Yennefer as an out-of-turn action, the sheet will warn us that Yennefer is not being handled by the sheet, and to remind the player to take the -3 penalty that they will take for an extra action. And we'll see Yennefer is taking an out-of-turn action. So the sheet will act as though Yennefer is acting here. And once this is all done, when we move to the next actor's turn, it comes back to the person whose turn whose it was just now. So you can play around with this if you want to change the initiative order a little bit. So something else I can do here is apply quick draws. Quick draws are an option you can have at the beginning of your round. At the beginning of every round, each character can declare a quick draw, and that would give them +3 initiative and -3 to their actions, and they would have to make attacks as their actions. So if you want to use a quick draw, so for example, if Geralt wants to beat, you can see Geralt and Knight 5 could both beat Mutated Ogre 3 if they used a quick draw. So let's do that and declare those quick draws. And you can see that the initiative is already changed, and as soon as I click done, the list is reordered. And then when I click to next round, if I start with Geralt, who's the player character, I get a reminder that I remind the player character that they take the -3 to all attacks, and they can only attack, because that's what a quick draw does. And if I hit a next character is an NPC, I actually have the option to, I get the reminder here as well, and you can see that the penalty is already automatically applied because this character is quick drawing. And as I move down the line and keep on switching through my combatants, when I end the round, you will see now, as soon as I click the next combatant button, the quick draws will end, and we're back to the original initiative. So you can use quick draws in the sheet as well. The sheet also allows you to apply just some really quick damage and just roll dice if you want. You just click roll damage dice conditions. What that will do is you can target a specific NPC and either apply conditions with a certain percentage chance or remove conditions with a certain percentage chance. You can choose from the list. Or roll damage, apply to any particular body zone or to all body zones at the same time, for example for bombs. Or if you just want to roll dice, you can ignore the NPC here and just click copy die roll to current status. So we can basically add like any kind of die here, and we can kind of do unaimed non-lethal damage to the ogre, and if we do that, we will see the result. Rolled 1d10 plus 10 is 11, applied so and so much damage, and that is basically then already calculated. You can see the stamina damage is already set up. Right, so you can use that if you want to just quickly roll some chances of things to happen. Now the last feature of this sheet is perhaps the most useful, but also one we've touched on a couple of times, but is maybe not so easy to understand. So you can also manage conditions with the sheet. This works essentially either, as we've seen before, by having attacks that apply conditions on a certain chance, by rolling tests that apply conditions on failure or on success, by applying conditions using the quick condition button, or you can just apply conditions as you choose. So basically, with this menu, you can apply any kind of condition to any NPC on the sheet. Now, you can choose whether it needs to be a condition, any kind of crit, or any kind of stabilized crit. And what you can do is basically, you can go and choose a condition, let's say intoxicated, and you can basically just apply that with its normal base settings. You can also set a percentage chance for it to be applied. Or you can apply and ask for main parameters. We're going to go into that in a second. Basically, if I click apply now on Mutated Ogre 3 Intoxicated, I'm going to see some penalties to their stats. You can see that Giant Club has gone down to 18 from the original 20, and we can see if we look at the NPC status summary for Mutated Ogre 3, we can see earlier on in the demonstration we had knocked Mutated Ogre down. They're now prone, so you can see the modifiers of the attacks, and we can see all of the modifiers that are applying to mutated OO based on all of their current conditions, as well as just some basic fluffy condition descriptions. So all of this will be tracked by the sheet in the blue cells, right? Conditions can reduce with a flat modifier, or they can reduce by a percentage. All of this is possible in the sheet. Now, skills can drop to negative values using this, so it's always important to sort of get an idea of what the precise modifiers are. And there's also possibilities where you can sort of change some of the parameters. Let's look at bleeding, for example. There are some effects in the game where you'll bleed for a higher damage point or with a stronger DC to remove it. We can change all of the settings for any given condition by clicking Customize Settings. And this gives us a whole load of options. So we can go into the damage, we can make the damage non-lethal, we can change the amount of damage per round. Base bleeding is 2, but of course we can change that at any time. We can make the condition do damage to body part rather than flat damage on everyone. We can give a flat damage on application. We can, if we apply this condition to somebody who has no anatomy, we can say, instead of applying the condition, do this amount of damage, right? We can change the body part, multiply it. So, we can say if we apply this to the head, we can make the head multiplier suddenly times 4, for example. We can do all of these different things. We can disable various things. We can sort of say if you're bleeding, you can't take any actions, or you can't take any defenses, or you can't move, or maybe your melee weapons all get disabled, your ranged weapons get disabled, your brawl gets disabled, or you can apply a condition that actually collects a weapon or weapons to be disabled by the condition. That's the disarmed condition, for example. Or you can apply general bonuses or penalties to melee attackers or ranged attackers. This is especially useful because the sheet can never know who is attacking you, really. And thus, if you've got a sort of something that applies bonuses to attacks against you, this will actually modify the character's defense so that, that is basically applied. Then we have conditions under which this condition can be removed. So do you want to remove it at the end of the NPC's turn after a certain number of rounds, or at the start of the turn after a certain number of rounds? You can enter dice here if you want, or you can enter just numbers. -1 is don't remove it at any time. You can like stunned, you can have it removed when the NPCs hit, or when they take an action, like staggered. You can have it removed, auto roll a removal skill at the beginning of the NPC's turn. And you can sort of say this takes the whole round. That'll give you a reminder message that the NPC is doing nothing else. So for stun saves, you would normally do this. Or you can have it just automatically removed without taking the whole round. You can try to give a specific skill to roll. So for many conditions are removed when you roll endurance against a set DC, right? So this would allow you to remove bleeding by rolling endurance if you did this. You can apply skill modifiers. You can select any number of skills here, and you can basically say take a modifier of +4 +2 to social etiquette, and add that if you want, right? Right now I'm not saving anything, so it's all being closed. We can have the condition do something every X rounds. So for example, we can have it force a test to be rolled after every X round. Let's say you have to roll resist magic every 3 rounds. You roll resist magic, and if you fail it, you get, frozen, right? And we can apply this. We can sort of add this custom effect. We can also add other effects so that, for example, every time the countdown hits, the flat hit point damage increases or decreases, or the DC to remove the condition increases, or certain modifiers change. We can sort of make all this. We can make quite complex conditions using this menu. Then we must customize what kind of messages are being displayed. So this is like the general condition message. Whenever like a reminder pops up, oh, this character is suffering from this condition, this is what you will see, right? A reminder message that is displayed for this condition at the start of every round. So bleeding we can typically remove with a first aid check. And we can actually set parameters that we might be asked every time we apply this condition. We'll get into that in a moment. So, for example, if the DC varies, we can actually set it up so that the condition asks us what the DC is every time it's applied. That way we get the right reminder. And finally, this is what I was just talking about. We can choose some parameters which whenever the condition is applied, it can ask us, is my flat hit point damage 2? Is my flat hit point damage 3, And that kind of thing we can also set up. So right now, if I apply bleeding to this ogre and have it ask for the main parameters, it will apply the condition as I'd configured it, so to do damage per round. But it will ask me how much damage per round. So for example, if a doctor is doing more bleeding damage per round, I can actually increase this to 5, let's say, right? And I can also modify the DC. So let's say the doctor made a particularly high DC to remove this bleeding effect, right? And at that point, I've actually added a customized bleeding effect to Mutated Ogre 3, and we will actually see that they will take such and such amount of damage, right? And there we go. That's how this sort of works, right? We can make custom conditions as well if we want. So we can either make something up on the fly. There's a specific option for that actually. Specific option for that actually that will ask us basically every possible question, yeah? Or we can modify any of our existing conditions to sort of help us out on the fly. We can also look at wounds, crits. When we apply crits, then they will always apply a stun save as well, and we can apply any of the crits from the book. And as you may have just seen, some conditions, for example, fire, has been modified to affect individual body parts. You have the option to select one random body part by clicking, or to apply a percentage chance to all body parts. So this will check for each body part a 50% chance. We can change that chance if we want, right? And that way we can sort of randomize what's being affected. So there's a lot of stuff you can sort of change if you want around the conditions and apply them, and they will automatically be calculated by the sheet. So if we set this ogre on fire as well as having it bleed, and we now have its turn start, we will get a long summary of what's going on. It's drunk, we made it drunk, it's lying on the ground from earlier on, it's bleeding, we get the reminder message we mentioned, it's engulfed in flames, affecting all these body parts, and there's a reminder message telling us what we could do to remove this condition, and we get a summary of how much damage it's taking, to its armor and to its attacks from ongoing conditions, and we get the question whether we want to integrate that straight away. And if we do that, we can see that quite a lot of damage has been taken, and this is going to keep on happening until we remove these conditions. To remove the conditions, all we need to do is just go to this menu and select Removing instead of Applying. And this will give us a list of everything that the Mutated Ogre has. So let's say the Mutated Ogre actually rolls on the ground and maybe uses an extra action to actually get up, and now these conditions are removed. So when the ogre's next turn is up, it won't be burning anymore. We can also, if a target has a critical hit, stabilize it. This will give us a list of the possible hits we could stabilize, and this would automatically replace the current version of the critical hit with a stabilized version. So this is also something you can do. Finally, you can customize or build your own conditions, and you can of course do this outside of combat as well. So all you need to do is just, you can name your own condition here, and you can set up whatever parameters you want that condition to do, save them. You can even select what you want the condition to ask you each time it's applied. And when that's all set, if you click Save this condition, it will actually be added to the sheet and will appear in the menu. So you can see right now, I've actually already got a couple of custom conditions in this particular iteration of the sheet. Things like pain, right? And you can see if you look at this closely, it does like in non-lethal damage per round and hits you and so on and so forth. So these are all custom conditions that were made using this menu. Right, so lots of options there. One final thing to perhaps note, you can actually apply conditions to opponents in the Bestiary. So if you want them to start with a specific condition, you can do it like this, right? I can just sort of set Mutated Ogres to get a specific condition at the start. For example, this is a way to apply regeneration to your monsters. If you want them to regenerate, I made a condition called Regeneration. You just click Apply and ask for main parameters. If you want to know how this works, it's basically just, it does damage per round, and it's set to ask you how much damage per round it actually does. So I just go apply, and then I just sort of set this up to, let's say if I wanted to regenerate 4 hit points per round, I would set it to -4 damage, and that would be that. So now whenever I spawn a mutated ogre, it's going to have that condition, which means it's going to be regenerating damage per round. So this is a way you can sort of set up your NPCs with even more customization to start with. And that is pretty much what the sheet can offer you. It should be able to manage quite a lot of combat. I realize that was quite a lot of input, but to be honest, the sheet is fairly user-friendly and it should be fairly simple to just click your way through it and just try it out. So I advise you to try it out a little bit. Unfortunately, I will have to upload this with an empty bestiary because I'm not allowed to share stat blocks from Talsorian games because clearly and understandably they want to protect their own intellectual property. But you will be able to get an empty version of this sheet from the download link you can see in the description. And you will also be able to try this out on your own time as you choose. Feel free to ask any questions you might have in the comment section for this video or in the Reddit thread that I made for this utility. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy. I hope it helps you run your games.